Hey guys, Brandon Zerbe here, and what I'm about to say might seem hard to believe, but it is true. So a recent study was published in the Journal of Nutrition, Education, and Behavior, where they quizzed participants on the food labels best diffused by and used by. And what they found was that 46% of participants didn't know the correct meaning of best if used by, and 24% of participants didn't know the correct meaning of used by on food labels. And if you thought that was crazy, what they did after that was they educated the participants on the correct meaning of these food labels and then quizzed them again, only to find out that nearly half of participants still didn't understand the correct meanings of these two food labels. And this got me thinking, if these two simple food labels can be so misunderstood, then an entire nutrition label must seem like rocket science. I mean, look at these two food labels, for example. The first one has less calories and less sugar, but it also has 10% of your daily sodium. And neither of them have a significant source of vitamins, minerals, protein, or fiber according to the labels. Well, the first one is 100% carrot juice, and the second one is Pepsi. Now, the added sugar section may have given it away, but the point here is there's a lot more to the story than what's shown on the label. So today, I'm going to detail what on the nutrition label warrants our attention and what can be ignored. And then I'm going to quiz you at the end on various nutrition labels to see if you can read them like a dietitian. So let's get into it. Let's start off by establishing that the best foods are whole foods. And whole foods are unprocessed foods that you could grow in a garden, like tomatoes, peas, lettuce, or sunflower seeds. And each of these foods has a unique combination of vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and phytochemicals that make them extremely healthy. And because of this, these whole foods don't require a nutrition label. It's why you can go to the store and just get some bananas without any packaging or nutrition label on it. But as soon as a food goes through some type of processing, like carrots being turned into carrot juice, then a nutrition label is required. And the more processing a food goes through, the more nutrients tend to be lost along the way. Therefore, it's best to consume foods in their least processed form. But this isn't always possible. Sometimes it's just easier to buy cooked and canned beans or peanut butter rather than cooking and processing the food yourself. So while whole foods is the gold standard, minimally processed foods can be a great option too. Now, when you're buying these processed foods is when you're going to see the nutrition label. And if you're not super into nutrition and you just see the nutrition label for the first time, it can be pretty confusing. It's information overload and companies can do a lot of things to kind of swing the numbers. So here are the basics. Calories is the amount of energy in a food. And typically if you're eating a whole foods plant-based diet, this is something that you don't really need to think about. It's pretty hard to overconsume calories when they're coming from strawberries, broccoli, sunflower seeds, and lettuce. So in most cases, for me, I tend to just ignore this number. Now, total fat is worth considering, but it doesn't necessarily tell us if it's a healthy or an unhealthy fat. We'll need to look at the ingredient list, which I'll touch on soon, to determine if it's fat from a whole food source or if it's fat that's been added. And it's this added fat that we want to avoid. Specifically saturated and trans fat being bad fat that we know we want to avoid, but luckily saturated and trans fat isn't really found too often in whole food plant-based diet. And cholesterol is something that I never look at. It's only found within animal-based products, so if you're eating a whole foods plant-based diet, cholesterol is just something you never have to worry about. Now, sodium is a critical factor that we do want to pay attention to. Now, in a whole foods plant-based diet, you're going to get all the sodium you need within the whole foods. Therefore, there's no need for any added sodium. Any added sodium will raise our blood pressure and increase our risk for heart disease, and therefore any added sodium should just be avoided. Carbohydrates are similar to fat in that it doesn't necessarily tell us if they're healthy or unhealthy carbohydrates. Now, when we look underneath that, fiber, for example, we get more than enough fiber on a whole food plant-based diet, so this isn't something that I pay attention to. When it comes to sugar, what I'm worried about is the added sugar. Natural sugar that may come from fruit, totally fine, but any added sugar, that's something we want to avoid. And then we also want to pay attention to refined carbohydrates. This is when the fiber has been removed from grains, and it's usually labeled as refined or enriched carbohydrates, and that's something we want to avoid, but we're going to notice that in the ingredient label. Protein, again, doesn't necessarily tell us if it's healthy or unhealthy protein, and honestly, most people are consuming an excess of protein, so this is something that I tend not to look at too much either. And the micronutrient section can be largely ignored too, because they usually only show about 4 vitamins and minerals out of the thousands of vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and phytochemicals that the body needs to stay healthy, and these can be found largely in just eating a variety of whole plant foods and proper supplementation. But really, I should point out a critical step that should be performed first before even looking at the nutrition label, and that's looking at the ingredients label. This is the first thing that I look at, and it tells me what whole foods I'm eating, what kind of processing has been done, and what kind of salts, oils, or sugar, any sort of junk that has been added to the food. And you should be able to recognize these ingredients too. So for example, if we were to take a look at Jif peanut butter, we can see the first ingredient is peanuts. And peanuts are a whole food that we recognize, we could grow them in our garden, and they're healthy, so that's great. But if we take a look at the ingredients after that, we can see added sugar, added salt, added oil, and something called diglycerides, which I don't even know what that is. But we can take that ingredient list and then look at the nutrition label to see how much salt, oil, and sugar was added to these whole foods, these peanuts, to create the peanut butter. And since we're looking for the least amount of processing in a food, by doing this process, we can see that this Jif peanut butter just isn't that healthy. It's been stuffed with added ingredients that are going to cause us to overeat calories and undereat nutrients. So a better option would be this once again peanut butter, which if you look at the ingredient label, the only thing that's in there are peanuts. And if the only thing in a food is a whole food, we don't even need to look at the nutrition label. We know peanuts are healthy, and this is the better choice out of the two. The other thing we want to watch out for besides added salt, oil, and sugar are refined carbohydrates. Refining a carbohydrate is a process where the fiber and key nutrients are removed from a grain or a food. And when you do this, once the fiber and nutrients have been removed, those carbohydrates are like an injection of glucose into the bloodstream, which is going to cause the blood sugar to spike, and it's going to cause the body to start storing fat, which is not healthy. And you can usually tell by looking at the ingredient labels if grains have been refined or not. They'll usually say refined, enriched, or something of that nature. Whereas whole grains are going to use the word whole, like whole wheat flour, or they're going to use like 100% whole. That's really what you're looking for, like 100% whole wheat, 100% whole grain. Something like that is going to let you know that it's not a refined grain and that it's healthy and good to eat. So to summarize, first we're going to look at the ingredient label to see what whole foods we're eating, what kind of refinement has been done, and what sort of junk like added salts, oils, and sugars have been added. Then second, we're going to look at the nutrition label to see how much added sugar, how much added oil, how much added salt was added to the food. And what we're looking for are foods with the least amount of processing, foods with the least amount of added salts, oils, and sugars, and foods that haven't had some sort of refining in the processing. So now that you understand the process, I'm going to give you a couple examples of different foods and their food labels to see if you can identify the healthier food, to see if you can read the nutrition label like a dietitian. So first up, let's take a look at these two breads. First, take a look at the ingredients in each of them, then take a look at the nutrition label in each of them, and see if you can identify which one that you think is healthier. I'll give you a few seconds and then I'll show the answer. And the correct answer is B. The Ezekiel bread uses whole grains and it doesn't have any added salt, oil, and sugar that you could find within that white Italian bread. That white Italian bread not only has the added salt, oil, and sugar, but has a lot of ingredients that you might not recognize, and it uses enriched flour, which is a refined grain. So let's get to our second and final example. Which soup do you think is healthier? A or B? Again, I'll give you a few seconds to look over the ingredients and the nutrition labels. Try to identify which one you think is the healthier version. And the answer to this one is A, the Joel Fuhrman soup. The Joel Fuhrman soup is made almost entirely of whole foods, with the carrot juice concentrate being considered an added sugar. But other than that, it's really healthy. If you look at the high fat content, you might be wondering what that's all about. That's coming from the cashews, which you can find in the ingredient label, so we know it's a healthy source of fat, making the food good to go. There's no reason why we shouldn't consume it. But if you look at the Campbell soup, on the other hand, we see that there's 3 times the amount of added sugar, there's tons of added sodium, and there's added animal fat, which we know isn't healthy and we do want to avoid. So here are my final thoughts. There's a ton of information on nutrition labels, so much so where rocket science may actually be useful. And while I didn't cover every aspect of the nutrition label or different ways that companies can manipulate them, I think this basic process can allow you to identify and make informed and healthy decisions. So first we want to take a look at the ingredient label to look at the whole foods that we know are healthy. We want to look for any sort of refinement that has happened, and then we want to look for any added salts, oils, and sugars or unknown ingredients that could have been added that we want to avoid. And then we can use, second, the nutrition label to see how much salt, oil, and sugar has been added to the food. Using this 2-step process, we can start to identify the least processed food, which we know is the healthiest food. And that allows us to eat a healthier and happier diet. Thanks for watching to the end of the video. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. And if you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Lastly, I offer one whole foods plant-based recipe that has no processing, no added salt, no added sugar. I also offer my top 10 sleep tips and one mobility workout that you can stream on any device. That is all free. There's a link down in the description for that. It also gets you signed up to my weekly newsletter, where I provide the 3 most important things I've read, watched, and listened to within the past week. All of that completely free. Link down in the description if you're interested in that. Thanks again for watching, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week.